Breaking news: Jerry Yen and Tong Liya's dazzling Hollywood debut. The buzz began as a whisper, an industry rumor that sounded like a fever dream. Then came the unmistakable images. A sleek black SUV pulling up to a sun-drenched studio lot, a flash of cameras, and two silhouettes stepping into a new world. By sundown, Hollywood had a new headline. Jerry Yen and Tong Liya star together in their first Hollywood feature, a sweeping genre-bending epic that promised to rewrite the rules of cross-cultural cinema. This is the story of that film. How it was made, the sparks on set, the scenes that took breath away, and the moment the film transformed two Asian superstars into global cinematic icons. This is not a press release. This is the movie magic, the backstage hush, the emotional electricity, told in close-up like the best scene in a film. The pitch. A story too big to stay local. The film, titled Crosswind, arrived on producers' desks as a simple concept with impossible scope, an interwoven drama about a Taiwanese musician, Jerry Yen, and a Chinese cultural historian, Tong Liya, who, after a chance meeting in Lisbon, get swept into a global conspiracy that threatens to erase centuries of cultural memory. What begins as a search for an antique manuscript becomes a race across continents, a love story tangled with moral choices, and a meditation on identity in an increasingly borderless world. Studio execs loved the pitch but admitted it needed two things to be credible on a global scale: authentic lead actors who could carry the multilingual, emotional weight, and a director with a fearless heart. Enter an acclaimed visionary director known for mixing art house beauty with mainstream momentum, and the unlikeliest of casting pairs: Jerry for his soulful charisma and Tong for her fierce, luminous presence. The result: a green light the size of an ocean. Casting the leads. A magnetic, deliberate choice. Hollywood often reaches for names that guarantee box office traction, but Crosswind did something different. It bet on the magnetic chemistry between two actors whose careers had been forged in Asia's most demanding arenas: television, film, and stage. Jerry Yen was the romantic icon, every slight smile weighted with memory. Tong Liya was an actor of quiet ferocity. When she moved, the camera wanted to follow. Their first table read in a midtown rehearsal studio was reported by a handful of insiders as electric. Jerry arrived with a battered leather notebook full of music scribbles and lyrics. Tong Liya had a stack of annotated historical notes and pictures torn from books. They sat across from each other and read. By the second scene, the director stopped the read-through and said simply, "This is why we made the film." Their chemistry was not instant infatuation. It was the slow burn of two artists who sensed the right chord and tuned themselves around it. They listened to the same rhythms, found the same silences, and in the quiet of rehearsal, built a language that would be its own cinematic dialect. The opening scene, Lisbon at dawn. The film opens on a Lisbon morning so beautiful it steals your breath. Cobblestone alleys still wet from dawn mist, a tram's distant bell, and the soft haze of fishermen mending nets near the Tagus River. Jerry's character, Lin Wei, wanders the Alfama district carrying a battered violin case. He is a man with music in his pockets but ghosts in his eyes. Tong's character, Dr. Mei Chen, appears in a shuttered bookshop sorting fragile maps. Their first meeting is small and human. An accidental collision, a spilled coffee, a laugh. No fanfare. The scene is careful. The camera lingers on the smallness of a hand brushing a sleeve, on the shared smile that remembers the same loneliness. It's poetry in close-up. Jerry fingers an old concerto with reverence. Tong traces a handwritten margin note in a centuries-old map and reads aloud a line that makes him stop. They exchange names. The city holds its breath. Set stories. Night shoots, language coaches, and midnight pizzas. Shooting Crosswind was an odyssey. The production moved from Lisbon to Lisbon's Azalejo-lined alleys, to the Scottish Highlands' brooding moors, to the neon-flooded streets of Shanghai, and finally to a sandbox of sand dunes in Morocco where the film's final chase sequence unfolds. On set, Jerry became the unofficial music supervisor, arranging nocturnal rehearsals in the trailer with classical motifs on loop. Tong insisted the manuscript research be authentic. She would sit with cultural consultants, arguing over the exact brushstroke that would appear in a key prop. Language was its own choreography. Scenes that required the two leads to switch between Mandarin, English, and Portuguese were rehearsed like complex pas de deux. A language coach was present during every take, but often the real translation happened in eye contact. The crew took to calling them the translators, not because they always spoke the same words, but because they translated feeling. And when the long nights stretched into the early hours, a ritual began. Pizza, black coffee, and quiet improvisations. The director loved those midnight jams. He'd lay down a new framing, hand them a fresh line, and watch what they made of it. Some of the film's most famous moments: an improvised confession in a rain-soaked courtyard, a whispered lullaby in a bunker, came from those small experiments. The fight sequence that was actually a dance. The film's midpoint features a sequence that critics later called the ballet of knives. Set in an abandoned textile mill, the scene is a physical argument that grows into an intimate revelation. On paper it was a fight. In the director's vision, it became choreography. Jerry and Tong trained for weeks with a fight choreographer who was also a contemporary dance specialist. They rehearsed footwork as if for a pas de deux. In the mill's half-light, they moved like actors and athletes merging. A thrust, a catch, a moment of impossible tenderness where a knife is set down not in defeat but in the language of trust. When it premiered at its first festival screening, the theater gave a standing ovation after this sequence alone. Critics wrote that it was not violence for spectacle, but tension made vulnerable. Off-screen chemistry. Late-night conversations and a quiet respect. Off-camera, the relationship between Jerry and Tong was built on small attentions. Early in production, Jerry learned to ask for Tong's preferred tea strength. Tong, in turn, sat with Jerry as he composed a melody for a pivotal funeral scene. There were rumors, as there always are, of an off-screen romance. The truth was subtler and more interesting, an intense artistic kinship. They pushed one another to be brave. When Tong once struggled with a scene in which May faces her past publicly, Jerry offered to stand behind the camera and read lines off cue until the take felt honest. When Jerry faltered on a violin passage, Tong sat with him at dusk and hummed intervals until his fingers found their way. This mutual stewardship of craft shows in the film's soul. Two artists polishing each other's edges until something timeless is revealed. The premiere. Red carpet glows and language of cameras. Premiere night was a mosaic. Flashbulbs, multilingual interviews, and a red carpet that felt like a meeting of continents. Jerry walked with a tailored tux that softened his rock star edges into old Hollywood class. Tong resplendent in a gown that blended Ming embroidery with a modern silhouette. She embodied the film's aesthetic fusion. The sun had not even begun to crest over the Los Angeles skyline when a convoy of black SUVs silently rolled into the Warner Brothers lot. Inside the first vehicle sat Jerry Yan and Tong Liya, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of city lights, their hands clasped tightly together. For the world, this was a historic day. The moment two of Asia's most celebrated actors stepped into the heart of Hollywood to begin their first joint film project. As the gates opened, the smell of freshly painted set pieces and the faint hum of crew chatter filled the air. Jerry, dressed in a crisp black leather jacket and a simple white t-shirt, exuded quiet confidence. Tong Liya, radiant in a soft beige coat that framed her delicate features, looked like she had stepped straight out of an editorial spread. But beneath the polished surface, both carried an electrifying nervousness, the kind you feel when you're standing at the edge of a new chapter that could redefine your career. The entrance that stole the morning. The moment they stepped out, camera flashes erupted like lightning across the lot. Photographers from Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, and Vogue USA jostled for position, desperate to capture this once-in-a-lifetime debut. Jerry, ever the gentleman, held Liya's hand and guided her through the chaos, pausing only when she whispered something to him in Mandarin that made him laugh softly. That laughter, paired with the gentle way he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, would later trend on Twitter with the caption, "The moment Hollywood fell in love." The studio tour, orchestrated like a movie scene. Before filming began, director Ethan Cole, a man known for his Oscar-winning epics, insisted on giving them a personal tour. "I want you to feel the heartbeat of this place," he said. leading them past cavernous soundstages and colossal props. They stopped at stage 19, where Jerry ran his fingers over a section of cobblestone street left from a classic 1950s set. "This feels timeless," he murmured. Liya knelt down, brushing the dust from an old lamppost, her eyes glimmering with curiosity. Ethan watched them both, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You two already move like my characters," he said. "I think this is going to be magic." Wardrobe fitting, a cinematic transformation. The costume department had prepared racks of breathtaking outfits, from flowing evening gowns to sharp, tailored suits. Liya stepped into a deep crimson silk dress with a slit that danced just above her thigh, the fabric clinging like liquid fire. When she emerged from the fitting room, the entire crew seemed to stop breathing for a moment. Jerry, who had just buttoned the final clasp on his tuxedo, turned, saw her and froze. For a heartbeat, it felt as though the film had already begun. "You're going to ruin every scene we're in," he teased quietly in Mandarin, earning a playful shove from Liya. The first scene. A street in Paris, in the middle of LA. By mid-morning, the crew had recreated a stunning Parisian boulevard right in the middle of the studio lot. A cobblestone road glistened as if it had just rained. The air was filled with a faint aroma of croissants from a hidden bakery prop. Street lamps glowed softly even under the California sun, casting a golden hue over everything. The scene was simple on paper. Jerry's character, an elusive art thief, encounters Liya's, a brilliant historian, for the first time. But in reality, it was a slow-burn masterpiece. The moment Jerry turned the corner and locked eyes with her across the cobblestone street, something shifted in the atmosphere. Crew members later confessed they had goosebumps, not because of the lighting or camera work, but because of the undeniable energy between them. The director let the camera roll longer than planned, capturing the unspoken glances, the small movements, Liya's fingers brushing a vintage book cover, Jerry's subtle smirk as he adjusted his gloves. It wasn't acting. It was something far more dangerous. Authenticity. Hollywood's whispered reactions. By lunchtime, word had already spread across the lot that this was the project to watch. Studio executives who had no business being there found excuses to wander onto the set. One producer was overheard saying, "They're not just making a movie, they're making history." Over sandwiches in a corner of the lot, Jerry and Liya finally had a moment to themselves. She leaned back in her chair, looking around at the whirlwind of activity. "Do you realize we're sitting in the middle of a dream?" she asked. Jerry reached for her hand again, his voice steady but soft. "It's not a dream if we're both awake for it." A sunset that felt like a promise. As the day wrapped, the crew set up for one final take. A long shot of the two walking side by side down the faux Paris street. The sun had dipped just enough to bathe the set in molten gold, the kind of light cinematographers pray for. Jerry slipped his coat over Liya's shoulders between takes, murmuring something only she could hear. The director called action, and they strolled into the glow, their silhouettes framed perfectly against the painted horizon.